the most feasible way we can make it work without like basically rewriting the team to make it work logically within the structure of how you currently do things or how classes are currently set up, but also making sure that you were in situations where you weren't having to input manually a bunch of information that was identical for a bunch of students. I will also remind you, you're going to have probably 30 different iterations, or there will probably be 30 different iterations of how exactly a class is set up. We get a lot of questions. Well, I've got 2 teachers doing this. I've got 1 teacher doing this. I've got this happening here. I've got this happening here. I'm not going to be able to go through every possible scenario today. I would encourage you to focus today on learning the general structure. Think through, so actually like take this and say, okay, this is how I think I would build it, and then feel free to grab one of us and say, I think this is how I would do it, let me make sure it's right, rather than us going through all sorts of different iterations in this room right here. I did get a couple of questions related to co-teaching. Co-teaching is allowable, there's a way to do it. We've addressed it in a few different locations. I'm not going to probably have a ton of time to go through again all the different possibilities for co-teaching today, but I will address it when we first go through the training piece and how it's set up. So again, just as a refresher real quick, under WIOA we have to track a variety of different pieces for each participant. This last little item here, whether or not the participant completed training, was a B. When they completed, or whether or not they went through was a particularly tricky piece for us because the way things currently are in teams, you kind of never leave. You're just kind of there forever. You may stop coming to class, and you may have your last service, but the way the system actually works, there's no like checkbox, you're done forever, we're done. And on this, we actually have to have a way to say, yes, this individual finished their training, or no, they didn't, they left. So one little piece, squishy piece, we have to make sure it works through. I took a picture during one of the meetings we had on the topic, and I'm actually really excited by it. This is one of the early meetings we had on the topic of how exactly are we going to track training and make it done in a way that's not super, doesn't deviate a whole lot from how we currently track things in teams. And it's actually pretty close to how things wound up. So I'm pretty excited. This little diagram is something you're probably going to want to go back to over and over again as we kind of go through this. Because if you understand what's happening in this diagram, it makes it easier to understand how you set this up in teams, how that actual thing works, and what happens when you do it. So just kind of walking through left and right, and I'm probably going to refer back to this diagram a couple of times. Think of every training service as a unique entity. And when I say every training service, I don't mean every, let's say, possible, zip code. So welding training, CNA training, medical assistant training. I mean this instance of this medical assistant training, this instance of this CNA training. So think of that as one thing. So let's use CNA as our example. Everything we love a whole lot, why? Let's use CNA. That's one individual CNA record for all the CNAs that are going to receive training between July 1st and August 30th is one record in teams. That particular record is kind of like a teacher in that that record contains all the information about that training. So all the information about the zip code and the stock and the program study, whether or not it's ECT and who's the provider and all that good stuff, that just gets assigned to the actual class where that training happens. So the information about the training, so again, those details that we have to report, the stock code, the zip code, the name, anything I'm forgetting. The provider is its own thing that just gets given to a class that contains all the information about the time of day and all that good stuff. So understand that first piece first. Then that class, all the details related to that training get assigned to every participant that is in that class. So again, think back to my CNA training. I've got a record of this one instance of CNA training that has all that data for that CNA training. Gets assigned to my class that takes place on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I register students for that class Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They now have in their profile all the information about that training. And I now have the data that says so-and-so participated in this training. So that general structure, kind of keep it in the back of your mind as you go through the screens because it'll make more sense. I do want to say, I had really hoped to, while you have the screenshots to be able to demo the test environment on here, I got an email at 3 o'clock yesterday that they wanted to repopulate the test environment all day today. So I wrote and I said, well, I've got 200 people, they're going to be looking at me ways to look at this. What would you like me to do? And they suggested I do it in a different environment. I can't get to that other environment. So we're going to look at the screenshot. Hopefully I'll be able to kind of show you some live stuff tomorrow. But today we're going to work off screenshots and do our darndest. So, again, the general structure, which I'm going to keep going back to. This general structure allows you to only have to add the services once. So if you think back to all those data elements that we have to report for each participant, it was on the table of possibilities. You would literally have to go in there and add these details for every single participant. Ooh, yes. The way it is structured allows you to add it once and then just register participants for that training instance, which makes it a little bit easier. It also allows you to maintain an individual instance of training across multiple classes. So here's an example. Let's say you are doing medical assisting. Medical assisting, let's say your program takes 6 months. And let's say those 6 months cross the program year. The way this is built allows you to keep that training, that instance of training that all of these people are tied to, active across that time period and assign it to different classes across that 6-month time frame. So your medical assisting class during those 6 months, you may have the first piece, which is the first class they have to complete the medical assisting, which is one class. They may then go to a second class that is a completely different topic, but it's still all leading towards medical assisting. It's still all related to that one training. They may then go to a third class. You can keep that one instance alive and carry it across the different classes, but each participant will only get that one instance of training assigned to them. So the system will say, okay, this participant completed 3 different medical assisting trainings. We'll know they completed 1. It just happens to cover 3 different classes. It also allows you to track outcomes for by participants. So as I mentioned previously, the way TEAMS is currently structured, there for a particular class, there's no like check we finished or check we didn't finish or check we were through on the date. So this particular structure, and I'll show you in a second, allows you to indicate yes, they finished on the date, or no, they were through. Because again, by participant, we have to whether or not that participant completed the training, and if they didn't, that they actually withdrew. I know we have some folks in the room from like our Accelerate Texas project. The way it's built is very, not, I won't say it's similar because you're someone with more important literally a spreadsheet, but in terms of the types of information that get reported, it's very similar to what gets reported for the Accelerate Texas project. So let's talk about actually adding in training. So you're gonna, get this functionality. July 1, you're gonna want to add a new training service. So first and foremost, I have to stress, please, whenever possible, I've found that adults that are there's a lot of, well, I learned it from this person, 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 and somewhere in that, someone started doing it wrong. Come back to the source. Come back to the materials you're getting today. We will, I guarantee, do a webinar with exact information. Take this hard copy document and make it, this is the source documentation to come back to, rather than kind of the, well, this person told me I do this, this person told me I do this person said this. Come back to the source. So, step 1, you will see a new option on the Teams menu. Underneath classes, you will see an option that says training services. We wanted to put it in a location that makes sense in terms of the kind of, if you again, for those of you that are live and die in teams, you know that menu kind of follows the team's order of operations. It follows the order that you have to do things in to set things up in a way that works, or that doesn't get you stuck in the data entry where you have to add something that you haven't already added. This kind of follows that general structure. Whether or not you add the training service before or after you set up the class, it doesn't necessarily matter. I will say it's probably a little bit easier to do it if you set up the class the training is going to be associated with first, and you'll see why in just a second. But those two things kind of fall in a general order there. So on the left-hand menu, you will see an option for training services. There is a training service search. Probably not any training services in the system yet. Won't be when you open it up because it didn't exist. So the first thing you will ever do is to add a new training service. But in the instance that you get to a point where you actually have to search for training services, because you have so many, which I think will happen, this does allow you to kind of search through those services, similar to how you search for other things. You can search by different categories, you can search by databases, all that good stuff. But for now, we're going to talk about adding a new training service. So as I mentioned previously, each training service is its own unique record. And I need to explain why. There's a reason. So, as I mentioned previously, the training service, that actual record, in and of itself, has a date that's tied to it. The reason that date, which is the start date of the training, has to live in that record, meaning, wouldn't it be great, and some schools will probably say, wouldn't it be cool if we could just add all the information for a CNA training and then add the date to the start date when it's signed? The reason we can't do that is because this directly ties to the ECP, because when you set up a new training service, you have to indicate it's in the ECP system, and that is all date-based. So, the reason I bring this up is you may have a situation where you have 4 cohorts of welding in a year. You're just rocking the IEP, you have 4 cohorts all starting in 1 year. You have your summer cohort, you have your fall, you have your winter, and you have your spring. Each of those instances will be a unique record because of that start date. Because that start date has to tie to when the training actually begins. And again, the reason that start date has to live in that record is because the whole record is tied to ETP, which is all day dates. And this was, we talked about this a long time at our meeting when we talked about this last week internally, because ideally, yes, we want to create welding training one, and then it gets a start date with the client. But you can't do that because of the way it's tied to the ETP system. This is again one of those conversations that took 3 separate meetings that were all, I think, 3 hours long. And I'm gonna pick on her for a second. Juana, I think, who's sitting over here at the pink. Juana is a godsend to AEL. Juana is, for a very long time, I kind of had to serve as a business analyst for teams because we didn't have any analysts that worked on our side. So I was getting pulled in many different directions. Juana came on board to work in a department that's in our division, that's a separate department, but she has essentially been my right hand. All of it is so amazing. Wanted her to be able to come today and tomorrow, for your questions, hear kind of, the background behind it, learn it, all that good stuff. But none of this would happen if she did not come on board, which she did. So very grateful for her. But she will tell you the number of meetings on just this one topic that has to take place in the design of this to make sure it works. Yes.
Hello. As this also on July 1, supposedly we're supposed to get this function.
Yes. And actually, you will get it. Well, it rolls out June 29th, which is next week, but it's not active until the new program year, and the new program year will be open until after July 1. So just clarification, but it will be ready next week.
And so for like our artillery group, so we have these individuals in the IT.
Yeah.
July 1, we're gonna enroll them.
So he's bringing up so the question is essentially, what are we doing with the ones that already exist? How is that going to work? What exactly is like, what should we do? We're going to need to set it up in such a way where you're essentially indicating, trying to, and this is one thing we do need to double check, is retroactively add that start date. Otherwise, we need to add that July 1 start date, knowing that it didn't really start on July 1, it started whenever else, we have to match that on the back end. That's one piece we haven't checked, but we need to make sure we do. We'll essentially start, set up your new class, find the training, yada, such that you're starting on that day.
Okay.
Good question. So the question, again, has to do with what is happening that is already happening. And again, I need to double check the functionality to make sure you can retroactively start that start date. Otherwise, we're going to need to start July 1 will be your start date.
Carrie, does that date, the start date of the training, does it have to link up with the ETP?
No.
Okay.
So let me clarify. The ETP, the reason the date is tied with ETP is ETPs have a time frame, I can't think of the word right now. Basically, they're active, like you get approval for a certain period of time. So whatever you're applying for, or whatever they've applied for, is only eligible for that certain amount of time and maybe not realized. And so if you try to add an ETP that's no longer an ETP, you wouldn't be able to because it's not active anymore. It's now an inactive ETP. So, but the actual ETP is just a date range. It's like this is active from July 1st, 2016 to July 1st, 2018. Your start date has to fall somewhere in that range, essentially. Good question.
Carrie,
Yes.
the class that we're linking this to, with our contextualized basic skill class.
Yes, and I'm going to show you the actual class in a second. So let's if we can write questions real quick, because So we're setting up the training record. So this is the training, again, the individual training record, meaning the individual instance of training for this group of students that is starting on this day. Start date is the day that the training started. Pretty self-explanatory. Day the training started. Again, as you see, they have a situation where the start date of the training is Tuesday and the day the film class starts Friday. 2 different days. The start date is the day the training actually began, and this will be reported for the participant as the day they enter training. Is it on the ECT list? Yes or no? Again, if it is, select yes. If it's not, select no. If you don't know, probably not. If you still want to check, select yes and see. But if you select that particular program is on the ECT list, that's the great thing on what you're out here. It will actually filter, and this is one piece. So I'm gonna back up here. So I got two kind of frustrating pieces of information yesterday and the day before. Two pieces of frustrating information. One was related to us not being able to access the testing environment today. The other is related to some of the functionality. You're going to hear me say a lot today. This is how it will work. Here's basically the options I was given yesterday at, I think, 1 o'clock. Some of this functionality is not working as well as it should. And when I say not as well as it should, it's not as user-friendly as it's supposed to be. It's a little icky. It doesn't filter like it's supposed to. It requires you to manually enter things instead of having things auto-populated for you, things like that. So the option I was given yesterday, option 1, release it as is, and have our release come out on time next week. Meaning this, along with all the best class issues, along with myriad other things that are bug fixes, things related to staff development, log off time, which is an issue in our internal audit. So a bunch of other things that are really important that we get out ASAP. So I could have it come out not perfect. This piece not perfect, come out next week. I could have them take training out, which would delay our entire release by 12 days, because this coding is now part of everything, meaning that plus would be done on time, staff development would be done on time, yada, yada, yada. Or we could not do the release at all and have it come out in mid-August with this correct. After much frustrating decisions and discussion, opted to have everything come out next week, knowing that this piece is not as user-friendly as it's going to be when they're able to fix it, which will probably be the first or second week in August. So you're going to hear me say throughout this is what it's going to do. Know that if you add a training in the next 5 weeks, it may not work exactly right. Be prepared. So this first piece right here, related to if you pick a program that's on the ECT list, the way it's supposed to work is this drop-down list will give you the details of the ECT. So it'll say, the way ECT works is, like you'll see right up here, action career training, well that's going to be here we go, Alpha Career or Alpha Medical Institute. All 3 of these are different things. They're named the exact same thing. The way it's built right now, you have to click on it, and then you got to go down and make sure your program is in there by putting in the zip code. And if it's not your program, you got to go back up to the top, select the next one, and the zip code. I had to explain that wasn't user friendly. So this particular piece right here will be essentially look more like a table where we'll have additional information filtering into it, so you can see, yes, this is the one I'm taking, yes, this is what I'm taking, yes, this is the one I'm taking. But if you add training that is on the ECC list between now and that first or second week in August, it will look like this. So that's one piece that's not working like it should. If the provider is not on the ECC list, you select no, and this will develop a drop down of your providers, exactly like your providers work when you add a provider or assign a provider to the site or assign a site to a provider. When you select the drop down list of providers, works the exact same way. You need the same list, which means you've got to make sure the provider is in the statewide list. You've got to make sure they're added to the grant recipient for the program year. Because I guarantee we're going to get lots of questions. People saying, "Our provider is on this list." Make sure you can add it to your program for this grant year. Training service days. This is open entry if your program is not on the ECC list. If your program is on the ECC list, it generates into the training program once you select the appropriate zip code, which I'll say should be the testing. If not, you need to the name. Now, I'm going to repeat this again. Every instance of training is its own unique record. Meaning, if you have a cohort that starts in July, cohort that starts in September, a cohort that starts in December, those will be three different records because they all have different start dates. So I would recommend you come up with some sort of classifications for how you're going to do your training, either cohorts or start dates or whatever, so that you can say, well-being, number 1, well-being, number 2, well-being, fall 2016, well-being, summer 2016, whatever, so that when you see these things in a list, you know what to switch. Now, as awesome as we are doing at IEP, no individual cohort is in a situation yet where they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trainings. But we're getting up there with enough to where this can get very confusing, especially in a larger consortia, if you're not making your things correctly within your consortia to set those things up. One other important piece. This particular piece right here, where you're adding your training service days, again, keep in mind, you're going to need to be able to kind of refer back to this to know which one it is, based on what the date is, based on what the start date is. So if you have, let's say, 2 summer cohorts, one started at the beginning of the summer, one started at the end of the summer, you'll call those summer. You want to make sure. And there will, and I'll show you what it looks like to actually look at the training. You can't see the start date, but just for general organizational sake, it's much wiser to call it something that makes sense. Training service type, this is what we talked about earlier. So again, in this drop down, you're usually listing the type of training. Please use gaps on the list. These two that do not apply to WILFED, we're still showing up in the list in our test environment. So I just went ahead and widened them out so there was no confusion. I'm actually looking right now and I'm seeing that my drop down got moved a little bit. So essentially focus on the list at the beginning of the training, not in this drop down screen. But this drop down screen will have the correct training sort of type. As I mentioned in our last training, there's probably 3 that most trainings will be a part of. But again, if you're not sure, if you're uncertain, that's when we have the staff to kind of help you make sure that you're selecting the right one. Program of study leading to, as I mentioned earlier, this is only required if the program is on the ECP. And if the program is on the ECP, it automatically populates. You won't be able to select anything if the particular program is not on the So again, this program of setting needs to, not something you have to fill out as you're setting up training in the system. So let's look at the zip code. So this is number 2 of not working how it's supposed to work. And this resulted in a very long and fun phone call the other day for me to try to explain what should be happening versus what is happening. What's happening right now is if you pick a program on the ECC list, this filters for the SIPs that are in that is approved for that eligible training provider. So if you selected Angelina College, it would filter for whichever program that has SIPs associated that are approved in Angelina. So I've got I know what program it is, and the SIP, I'm going to start putting it in essentially as you start putting it in, it kind of does a nice little thing where if I type 0, it'll pull up everything that starts with 0, 4, okay, now it's 4, okay, now I get the right one, so it kind of auto-fills, kind of like Google when you're searching for something, because sometimes the auto-fills are awesome, but it kind of gives you recommendations for what you're trying to search, and once you select the correct one, it fills everything else in for you. Right now, it is not doing that for programs that are not on the ECP, meaning for programs that are not on the ECP, between now and the beginning of August, this is an open entry text field. Yay! So, I invite you to go back to the list of SIPs, know which SIP is yours. You only need to put in a code. You don't need to put in any other information unless you really want to. You need to use the 6-digit code. And once the change is active on July 1st, it will be, or August 1st-ish, first week in August, how that data migration will work exactly is going to be up for discussion. It'll be one thing. Either if you ever edit that record, it won't let you have an open entry text field to correct it. So it's kind of like things right now where if something gets added, after a certain date, you've already saved a record, it only requires you to enter if you ever edit that record. It'll be that situation. Or you'll just leave it as is. So again, beginning when this first comes out, this is going to be an open entry text field. I double checked as part of our decision making, deciding whether or not we were going to be ready for one delay this release. Our data division director determined that he wasn't super concerned, particularly since the story of you was going out. There's going to be some issues. Some of the stuff is going in. We're going to do our best to clean up on the back end. They're not going to have thousands of records being added between now and August 1st. So he wasn't horrifically concerned about it. This will be an open entry text field until that kind of stuff will be comes out in mid-August to fix it, or beginning of August to fix it. The same goes for the occupational skill training code. So again, this will be open entry text until the beginning of August, when that correction is able to be made to allow you to filter, so that you'll start typing in the number and it'll auto pull from that national list. Please note that both of these are different than a drop-down list. So it's not going to be a drop-down list where you scroll to your options. It's going to be you just start putting in the number and it'll auto fill it for you. So ultimately, you still need to generally know what the number is, unless you seriously want to search that way. You're still going to need to know what your program is tied to. So I'm going to stop there before I get to the next phase. This is just adding the record, nothing else. We haven't done anything else with this information. We haven't assigned it to the class, we haven't assigned it to the system, just added the record. So I'll stop and ask if there's questions about adding the record. Does anybody need to get some stretch?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, let's get up and stretch for just a minute. Down. Down.
Everybody breathe